Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today we'll be talking about the top 10 tips for Galaxies in patch 10.14. We're a few patches into the mid-season update and well into set 3 as a whole, so now's a good time to look back at Galaxies once again. Do keep in mind that Galaxies get rotated out, so not every tip we have today will be relevant in upcoming patches. That said, let's jump on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright folks, let's get back into the video. Kicking off the top 10 tips for Galaxies is tip number 10, using Thieves' Gloves to bypass the 2-item limit on the Binary Star Galaxy. Bypass is a bit of a stretch here, but essentially what Binary Star does is prevents each champion from holding more than 2 items. Well, with Thieves' Gloves, you can work around this because the item itself provides 2 items as well as its own stats. Basically, you're getting 3 items worth of stats, which in a way bypasses the 2-item limit of the Galaxy. Of course, this doesn't mean that you should only focus on grabbing gloves to give Thieves' Gloves to as many champions as you can, but it does allow you to fully itemize the 2nd or 3rd carry champions in your build. For example, if you're running Cybernetics and you have Vayne, Echo, and Aurelia, you can slap that item onto Aurelia or Echo, and now you've got full items on one of your carries. It is worth pointing out that gloves aren't exactly that easy to come by, as they tend to be contested quite often in the carousel. So it may not always be a viable option to go for this strategy on Binary Star, but when you find yourself with multiple gloves, it's good to keep in mind the possibility of running it. Next up, we have another Binary Star focus tip coming in at number 9. The tip is to play compositions on Binary Star with multiple damage sources. What we mean by this is that quite a few builds focus primarily on one champion to carry. Examples include Jinx in Brawlers or Rebels, or something like Jhin in Snipers. With the way Binary Star works, it's not possible to fully deck out these carries as hyper carries, so you want to make sure that you're playing a composition that doesn't heavily rely on 1 or 2 specific champions to do damage. So you may ask, what builds are good for Binary Star? Anything that can utilize several different sources of damage tends to be great. Cybernetics is the best example, as you can run Vayne, Aurelia, or Echo as your main source of damage, while the rest of the cybernetic units do okay with just 1 item or component. With that example in mind, just try to think about other sources of damage for whatever build you're playing. Sorcerer is another trait worth considering, as you can spread out items a bit more to multiple champions instead of hyper-focusing on 1 or 2. Use the limitation of Binary Star Galaxy to innovate different ways to itemize your comps. The number 8 tip on the list is to use the NEEKO'S help from the NEEKO'Verse Galaxy to get an early advantage by using them on a 3-cost champion. Normally on this Galaxy, a lot of players save their NEEKO'S help for either a quick 2-star 4-cost or 5-cost champion. This is a great way to play the Galaxy, but there is another option. That option, which we're sure you can have guessed based on the tip, is to use the NEEKO'S help early on to gain an advantage. Now, we don't mean to use it on any 3-cost champion you find, but there are a few that are fantastic at carrying you through stage 2 and provide you with either a win streak or an economic advantage. It should also be done early in stage 2, preferably on 2-1 or 2-2, which generally means you found the champions as a drop during the PvE round. There's quite a few decent options such as Jace or Vayne and Cassiopeia, but we want to highlight 2 specific ones for patch 10.14. Bard is the first because a 2-star Bard early on in the game gets so much value. With an increased spawn rate of his meeps, he will quickly earn you enough experience to level without spending any gold. The second champion we want to talk about is Shaco. Shaco is sort of the replacement to Vayne in this patch as one of the strongest 3-cost carries, so getting him 2-starred early is absolutely fantastic. Shaco does require a lot of items to carry, and since the goal is to win streak, make sure you have at least 1 AD item to put on him before you commit to using your NEEKO'S help. Next up is the number 7 tip, which is about the SUPERDENSE Galaxy. This tip is to plan your late game composition around the extra playable unit from the free Force of Nature. It's easy to use the free Force of Nature from this Galaxy as just a quick means to boost your board throughout the game without much planning. But the strongest aspect of this Galaxy is the guaranteed extra champion when you're level 9. This means you have a ton of room to add in whatever you want in the late game. There are the standard options of just playing good legendaries like Thresh, but if you plan ahead and think about what traits or champions may help your composition the most, you may get a large advantage later on in the game. An example would be a composition that can't normally fit in for a Mystic, but with the extra space available, you can now have the option to flex into it if needed. Or perhaps you see an option to go Celestial. By planning for that, you'll be able to easily fit it in at level 9. Essentially, what we're talking about is thinking ahead more so than you may normally do. It's not the easiest thing if you're unsure what you may need, but simply by scouting, seeing what other players are playing, and planning a means to counter them is an easy way to go about it. Let's move on to the number 6 tip on the list, which is that the 2-4 carousel is extremely pivotal to tell how you will do in Stage 3 on the Star Cluster Galaxy. While each carousel is important in the Star Cluster Galaxy, it's really the most important on 2-4, because securing a strong champion can increase your board strength so much that Stage 3 becomes much easier to play. It's definitely a bit of a toss-up on whether or not you'll get a champion of good value, which is why this Galaxy is very punishing to low rolling. There isn't any one champion in particular that we can say is better to go for or not, because it highly depends on what champions are available, their items, your board for that game, and what other players' boards are. Just try to grab a champion that makes you the most powerful immediately. An example would be grabbing an Ahri from the carousel to instantly give you an Ahri 2 to go with your other sorcerers and Star Guardians. Up next, we have 2 tips for the new Galaxy Dwarf Planet. First is the number 5 tip, which is to use strong AoE abilities to utilize the small board effectively. This tip is multifaceted because there's a large amount of potential effects in the game that you can use on a much smaller board. There's the obvious ones such as Gnar getting a lot of value with his ability to displace the enemy team, or something like Gangplank that will hit a huge portion of the board since it's smaller. Even the mech gets more value because of the tighter space. But we want to highlight a couple effects that get a lot of value on this Galaxy that may not have been considered. First is Jarvan. Jarvan in 1014 got huge buffs and is quickly becoming a staple of the meta, and his value only goes up on the Dwarf Planet Galaxy. Why is that? Because his ability can easily hit basically all of your champions if you place them nearby, which means you guarantee an attack speed buff to your backline carry. On the normal board, it's difficult to always do this without special positioning, but with the smaller board, you can do it much easier. The other effect that we want to talk about is the slow from Frozen Heart. Placing it on a champion that can get to the backline, either an infiltrator or something like Gnar, gets insane amounts of value on the Galaxy. It will be able to hit many more champions than usual, which increases its value by a ton. Overall, this tip, as we said, can be applied to many different AoEs in the game, so the best way to find out what works is to try them. The next tip for the Dwarf Planet Galaxy is coming in at number 4, which is to avoid playing backline focused compositions. As stated before, with the smaller board, it's easier for a lot of effects to be more devastating than normal. This means that a build that relies heavily on a backline carry, say Jhin or Jinx, can be quite detrimental. It can be a bit more protected from infiltrators by clumping them up, but that clumping also makes them highly susceptible to AoE CC. We're not advocating for you to avoid backline carries entirely, but make sure you're protecting them diligently if you're running them. Use defensive items, clump when possible, and scout often. It's also good to split up the power of your composition a bit, not to be reliant on 1 or 2 carries, and instead a more generalized damage by spreading out your items. Or simply play builds like Protectors or Vanguard Mystics that do well by outliving your opponent more so than 1 or 2 units doing a lot of damage. Coming in at number 3, we have a tip for both NEEKO'S and Trade Sector, which is to use the pre-leveling to gain a potential early game advantage. If you're not sure what pre-leveling is, it's basically getting your experience 2 away from the next level so that at the beginning of the next round, you will automatically level up. The best example of this is on the 2-4 carousel. If you hit the level up button once after you've already leveled to 4 on 2-1 or 2-2, you'll be 8 out of 10 experience prior to round 2-5. Once the round begins, you'll level up to 5. How does this earn you an advantage? By pre-leveling, you earn the level right at the start of the round before the shop rolls. So in the early game when you pre-level to 5, you have a chance to roll 4-cost champions on round 2-5. They won't always earn you an advantage as it's a small % chance to even roll a 4-cost champion, but when it does happen, you can get a huge power spike. For Trade Sector, this is doubly good because you get effectively 2 shops to roll each round, so you now have 10 chances to get a 4-cost champion by pre-leveling. NEEKO'S should be obvious as getting a quick 4-cost champion means you can use your NEEKO'S help on them. Let's continue the theme of the previous tip with leveling aggressively to gain advantages on the Trade Sector and NEEKO'S as our number 2 tip. Now that we've talked about pre-leveling, we can expand on that tip by talking about leveling aggressively. This means sacrificing a better economy to level earlier. It often leads to pre-leveling as well, so these 2 past tips really go hand in hand together. This can be done on any Galaxy, but NEEKO'S and Trade Sector do benefit the most since you're pushing levels with the intent to hit higher cost champions. Preferably level at times when you know you'll get an advantage on your board for doing so, such as being able to play a strong champion or trade. After that, you'll reap the benefits of leveling by potentially rolling higher cost champions, so you can easily snowball a lead by playing aggressively. And our number 1 tip for today is to look to counter the 2 items provided by the Galactic Armory. Most often, players will see what the 2 items items are for the Galactic Armory and try to tailor their comp around them. For example, physical damage items like Last Whisper or Deathblade would point towards something like Cybernetics or Jin Carry, so what you can do is try to play to counter that. Scouting becomes your best friend when playing like this, as you want to keep tabs on anyone utilizing the starting items in their build. If it's heavy AD items, counter it by playing Vanguards or heavy armor defensive items. Magic items, play Mystics and make Dragon's Claw. It's not always going to be possible to counter the starting items, but when it's obvious what players may want to do with them, you can play around them, and this can result in an easy top 4 placement. That is going to be it for today's video, folks. Galaxies are a constant source of change for the game, which can be daunting for new players. We'll be back in the future to cover more tips once there's been a few more rotations and new Galaxies coming in and older ones leaving. Let us know in the comment section below if there's any tips you would have for the current Galaxies on patch 10.14. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.